With rare earths under one arm and possibly another AUKUS down payment under the other, the Prime Minister is preparing for his long-awaited Oval Office meeting with Donald Trump. Well, on the other side of politics, the musical chairs continue as Barnaby Joyce weighs jumping from the Nationals to One Nation. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. Anthony Albanese leaves this afternoon for the White House, where he's due to meet the US President early Tuesday, Australian time. Oval Office encounters with Donald Trump, usually televised live, can be a wild ride for world leaders. But the Prime Minister has good reason to expect this one should be largely positive. The US is scrambling to find new supplies of rare earths and critical minerals as China tightens export controls. Australia is offering a solution. At home, the Treasurer was left to announce one of the government's biggest backdowns to date after the Prime Minister pulled rank and ordered a shift on superannuation.
Morning.
A major about-face from the Federal Treasury.
One supersized backdown.
This is a change to the proposal that we made more than 2 years ago.
Today is indeed a humiliating day for the Treasurer.
And this one has been difficult. It's been contentious, as you all know.
Controversial planned changes to superannuation taxes have been abandoned.
The Treasurer has junked the idea of taxing unrealised gains and agreed to index the new tax thresholds.
It is a victory for common sense.
The government has gone weak on taxing the wealthy.
We found another way to deliver on the same objectives.
Millions of workers are the winners.
Jim Chalmers also announcing a boost to the low-income super tax offset.
This will mean more superannuation for 1.3 million Australians.
He said for years that his tax policy was right. Clearly it wasn't. He's now got egg all over his face.
These are sensible changes which take more than 2 years of feedback into account.
A difference of approach between a pragmatic Prime Minister and a Treasurer more willing to crash through.
Federal Treasurer has denied he was rolled by the Prime Minister.
Well, the Prime Minister and I agreed these changes. The Prime Minister and I agreed these changes. We agreed these changes. The Prime Minister and I agreed these changes.
Trade tensions between the US and China are intensifying yet again.
Following their move to tighten exports of rare earth minerals.
It was shocking.
美方的解读严重曲解并渲染夸大中方措施。
We are not going to let a group of bureaucrats in Beijing try to manage the global supply chains.
The market for critical minerals is not as reliable and robust as it could be.
We're going to be speaking with our European allies, with Australia.
We can be a very reliable supplier.
If China wants to be an unreliable partner to the world, then the world will have to decouple.
It's well understood here that Australia has put a lot of effort into stabilising that key economic relationship with China.
And make no mistake, this is China versus the world.
Well, Australia's interests are best served by more trade, not by more trade barriers.
This trade dispute provides an opportunity for Anthony Albanese to offer something Donald Trump desperately needs.
And no doubt it will be part of the discussions that Prime Minister Albanese has with President Trump next week.
Godspeed, PM, and land some deals.
Thanks very much. Cheers. Thank you.
And my guest this morning is the Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke. First, let's check what's making news. Barnaby Joyce is creating plenty of headlines and some confusion, it seems. News Corp papers say the former Deputy Prime Minister has spectacularly quit the National Party. And that's all, folks. The Nine papers say he's declared he will break from the coalition, with Pauline Hanson courting him to join One Nation. In his statement yesterday, Barnaby Joyce said he would no longer attend meetings of the Nationals' party room, with no decision yet on his next move. Nationals leader David Littleproud says he wants his predecessor to stay in the party.
He was elected a National Party member. He, like the other 18 members of the party room, including me, all have a voice, and that voice is important to be in the collective. And he hasn't tendered a resignation from the National Party. He's made it clear to his party members that he won't be recontesting the seat of New England.
More on that coming up. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, meanwhile, says he will meet his Chinese counterpart in Malaysia in an effort to de-escalate trade tensions over critical minerals and rare earths. The meeting could determine whether Donald Trump and Xi Jinping go ahead with a planned summit in South Korea. We'll get to the latest turmoil in the coalition and how the right is realigning. We're going to start, though, with Anthony Albanese's date with Donald Trump. The Prime Minister's faced criticism all year for failing to secure this meeting. The delay, it turns out, may have been a positive. Australia has now lifted restrictions on US beef imports and ramped up spending on a key shipyard where US submarines can be maintained. And then there's the rare earths. Australia has what the US desperately needs. The timing of this meeting has worked to Anthony Albanese's favour. Let's see what the panel makes of it. We're joined this week by Laura Tingle, Peter Hartcher and Karen Middleton. Very good morning to all of you. Laura, let's start on this this meeting. Look, before we get to the nitty-gritty of critical minerals, how important is this White House meeting for Anthony Albanese and what does he need to achieve here?
Look, I don't think it's quite as important as some people in Australia think it is, in the sense that, you know, if you look at what's happened since Trump became president, his perception in the world has deteriorated, shall we say. The government has actually, I think, fairly successfully moved from the often obsequious position that Australian governments take towards the US to a more confidently independent position. So, you know, there's always the prospect that the whole thing will blow up. But if you think about the various issues that have come up, you know, tariffs were frightening. Now, you know, 10% looks relatively good. It's not actually great since we're supposed to have a free trade agreement, but doesn't look too bad. Defence spending, I think the government thinks it's got an argument to put, and it's not just going to be about that percentage of GDP position. We've got all of these facilities, like the facilities at Tyndall, which allow nuclear-armed B-52s to fly in and out, rotation of troops, submarines, all of those things. All of the big contentious issues have sort of, you know, have got sort of cover. And I think the other thing that's sort of interesting is when Donald Trump came into the presidency, there was this big concern about the extent to which he would be confronting China. Now, clearly the trade issue is complicated, but he hasn't really taken them on full blast. They keep, you know, dodging and weaving on that. And if you look at what Trump has said about the South China Sea and the general issue of strategic ambition by China, he hasn't said virtually anything about this.
Or
it's
Taiwan.
Really, it's well, Taiwan is part of that. It's striking. He talks about Taiwan in terms of what are the little things called?
The microchips.
Microchips and all those things. Yeah. Technical, Laura. But they're not. They're not engaging in a geostrategic way with China about the region. So I think all of those things have changed. And the other beneficial thing that's happened just in the last few days is that there's been a pause in this standoff about maritime carbon emissions. And that could have been difficult for the Prime Minister going into the White House. So it should be okay. It should be okay.
But Peter, I mean, Anthony Albanese knows Trump's unpopular here. He doesn't want to be one of those leaders seen to be sucking up to Donald Trump. But, you know, he still is incredibly powerful in the United States. Few are pushing back on him at all. And this is a relationship that's still critical to certainly our defence plans under AUKUS.
So the two fundamentals that apply here, I think, are one, as you've said, for Albanese's domestic political constituency. Australians don't like Trump. They just don't like him. And faith in the US as a security guarantor has fallen into a now minority statement in the latest poll from the US Study Centre. But the other fundamental is that for the first time in post-war history, you've got, in the history of this alliance, this is no longer a values-based alliance. It was always based on the shared value of democracy. Well, Trump doesn't believe in democracy. What we see here is an authoritarian leader trying to consolidate power as an authoritarian. So this means that Albanese, both of those fundamentals mean that Albanese should not and cannot look too obsequious. In fact, I saw Arthur Sinodinos's former ambassador to the US recommendation that he should be nice but not obsequious.
Ingratiate, don't antagonise, I think is the challenge.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the fundamental. And what Albanese's task is here is to salvage as much of the functional alliance relationship as he possibly can without getting entangled in the domestic politics or the authoritarian nature of the Trump regime. He's got a lot to salvage, and it depends largely on the mood and the whim of Donald Trump on how much he can.
And he's got these rare earths in his back pocket heading into this meeting. Now, this is something that Australia has been trying for years to get the US interested in. Under Biden, we had compacts and task forces and didn't really get very far. Now, though, the game does appear to have changed. I want to show you this. That China, a bit over a week ago, announced it would be seriously tightening its export controls. It dominates the market on rare earths. This has put the US into a scramble to find other sources. Trump said he was shocked at what China had announced. His Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, even started talking about, well, the world might have to decouple from China.
If China wants to be an unreliable partner to the world, then the world will have to decouple. The world does not want to decouple. We want to de-risk. But signals like this are signs of decoupling, which we don't believe China wants.
Well, he's now going to be meeting with his counterpart ahead of Trump meeting with Xi. It doesn't look like they want to decouple either. No. But how serious is this problem for the US right now?
Well, very serious. And so the timing, I suppose, of the Albanese meeting in relation to rare earths has an upside and a downside. The upside is now that China is placing these restrictions on them. I mean, there's something like 17 rare earth minerals. China's placing export controls on 12 of them. It produces something like 70% of the world's rare earths, and it processes 90%. So it's got a grip on them. Now it's placing export controls. The US has to look elsewhere. That's a huge opportunity for Australia. But what they wouldn't have wanted, the Australian government, is that them going the extra step and saying you need to decouple from China. We're not in a position to do that. Yeah. For a long time, successive Australian governments have been trying to encourage diversification, particularly in business, in industry, to look to other markets, to Southeast Asia, for example, and get beyond just China. But China is still massively important.
The idea and that is decouple is also pretty far-fetched. Yeah. Look, just on the critical minerals issue, Albanese announced before the election this $1.2 billion strategic reserve of critical minerals. The details still remain, a bit confidential and a bit fuzzy, but it's taxpayers' money to try and incentivise more investment into the mining and processing of this stuff. I did speak for the podcast this week to Hayley Channer from the US Studies Centre, who says it's absolutely vital that we do have some taxpayer support to get this stuff off the ground.
You do need to make some interventions in the market because of where we are now globally. Other countries are intervening in their markets in ways we haven't seen for a very long time. It's an unfortunate reality, but if we don't do it, we will not be capitalising on this incredible sovereign resource we have.
Yeah, the coalition has not supported this sort of taxpayer support for critical minerals. Andrew Hastie does. But Peter, what do we know about the deal that's on the table from Australia?
Well, without government support, there will be no refining of rare earths in Australia or in any other non-China country.
Because China does it so much
cheaper. As a matter of policy, China now for 30 years has been pricing its rare earths below fair market value. So it's been putting other refiners around the world out of business. The US government spent $1 billion a few years ago to restart their only critical rare earths mine. It was out of business within a year because it couldn't compete against China's lowball pricing. So unless governments are going to support the industry, it won't exist. So what Australia's got on the offer now on the table for the US, and it's had this offer on the table since April. Trump's been busy with other things. The Chinese punch in the face has drawn his attention abruptly back to this problem. What Australia is offering is a guaranteed supply of rare earths of every description in a supply chain that the US can rely on.
There's only reliable supply.
Reliable and guaranteed is the critical word.
Comes at a high price.
Well, they're inviting American co-investment in the Australian sector in processing. They're offering government subsidy to support it. There's already a tax offset in the Australian system, thanks to the Albanese government, to help this along, plus the direct subsidies. So there is an offer there. Trump's now got an urgent problem to solve. Albanese can help him solve it. Timing is good. but it has been on the table since April. But really, David, this is much more than just a trade dispute. This Deng Xiaoping, the primary leader of China and the father of its modern economy, said as long ago as 1987, the Middle East has oil, China has rare earths. And just as the Arab nations put an oil embargo on in the 70s, to the horror and shock of the world economy, creating the oil shocks, China has now put an embargo on 92% of the world's supply of rare earths. Without those, you can't have a modern economy. The Americans are in deep trouble unless they can deal with this. Australia is an obvious and easy solution.
Is there going to be a deal, do you think, on this, Laura?
Well, it's hard to see why there wouldn't or couldn't be. I mean, the government is being very reluctant to
give much away,
to anticipate anything. But you know, it really does reflect the fact that the Prime Minister is going in with an exceptionally strong hand, you know, to this meeting, and I mean, even this whole thing about decoupling. I mean, that might affect people who are, you know, market takers, but we're actually, you know, in this really strong position that we actually have lots of this stuff. And as Peter says, if we can develop the processing facilities fast enough, you know, we're in the box seat.
All right, time to move on and talk to the Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke. To take us there, he was the shadow immigration minister on the lack of long-term planning on migration.
There needs to be long-term planning across the federal government, the state governments and local government. During the last year, the federal government said it was going to engage in a multi-year planning approach with respect to the permanent migration intake, and it just dropped that. It dropped that. We just got a 3-sentence announcement of the permanent migration intake for 2025 with no explanation as to why they dropped the multi-year planning.
Tony Burke joining us from Queenstown in Tasmania this morning. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, David, and welcome to the Hunt Hotel in Queenstown. Anne Urquhart's brought me down to Queenstown for the Unconformity Festival. So right now your Insiders viewers are in the arts capital of the nation for this weekend. OK, well, unconformity is perhaps going to be the theme of the discussion. We'll see. Just on that point from Paul Scar there, the Shadow Minister, last year your department did announce that it would move to a 4-year planning model for immigration. It said that this would enable migration planning to better align with long-term infrastructure, housing and services planning across all levels of government. What's happened to that plan? Look, part of my reservation on, as I've looked more deeply into this, is the first job of the immigration program is to make sure it is tailored to the needs of the nation. And what I am concerned about is if you overcommit where you will be at in future years, you miss some of the changed needs of the nation that we have. In the coming years, there'll be different start dates, for example, in different parts of AUKUS, where we will have Australians moving on, particularly in certain states, moving on to higher paid job opportunities, and we'll need to backfill some of their jobs as well. There's different changes that will happen at different points, and my concern is to make sure that we keep the flexibility, that we are very precisely targeting our program for the needs of the nation. Are you saying it's too difficult to do a 4-year plan for migration? Well, imagine if you'd done a 4-year plan in 2018 or 2019, what would have happened once the pandemic hit? If you'd done it during the pandemic. That's a once-in-a-generation event. That's right, but in terms of the manufacturing opportunities that we're going to have through AUKUS, they're very significant changes as well. You look historically at this, I'm working through how we can engage in as much multi-year work as possible, but also to be very sensible about making sure that we have the full flexibility we need. I never want to have a situation where we feel committed because we'd announced this is where we'd be 3 years earlier, and we lose some of the flexibility we need to take advantage of exactly what Australia needs in that moment. Bottom line on this one, though, is the level of immigration right now too high, in your view? Look, it's been coming down and it needed to come down. In terms of net overseas migration, we're now 40% below the peak. The key area where the numbers were beyond where it was in the interest of Australia for them to be was with respect to student visas. So that was some of that was overstated because of net overseas migration after the pandemic. You had 3 first-year, second-year, third-year students all arriving on brand new 3-year visas. So that some of it was just the way things flowed after the pandemic. But it was also true that, and remains true, that international education is the only industry that I can think of where you need to find a long-term home for every customer.
But where we are now, sorry, just back to the question, is the current level too high still?
Well, as I said, it was too high. It needed to come down. It's going to continue. The net overseas migration figure we're expecting will continue to soften, will continue to come down, and that's just getting us to appropriate levels post-pandemic.
What's the appropriate level you're looking at?
Well, it's tailored to the needs of the nation is the answer to that. You need to remember, for our immigration program, a whole lot of it is visas that are skilled work visas that are demand-driven. Now, I never want to have a situation where we have a demand for more healthcare workers and we say, oh no, we're not going to do them, we're just going to close shifts in our hospitals. I never want to have a situation like we have tripled in the last few years the number of people coming on construction visas. Now, you look at this immigration debate is usually side by side with the debate about making sure that we've got the infrastructure and the housing in place that we need. You know, it would be completely cutting off your nose to spite your face to say, well, we're going to commit ourselves in some way that stops us from getting the construction visas that we need as a matter of demand.
Can I ask you about Barnaby Joyce potentially moving to One Nation and how seriously you're taking what looks to be some realignment on the right of politics right now and the impact that might have on the migration debate in your portfolio? How are you viewing this?
Yeah, look, first of all, I'll answer in the terms that you've given, not in terms of where the coalition's up to, because there's matters that matter for Australia. And if I put it in these terms, social cohesion matters. Social cohesion really matters. And the days that people used to talk about being able to engage in dog whistle politics and you give a message and only certain people would really hear what you were saying, it's not a dog whistle anymore. It's it's a set of bagpipes coming over the hill, and you can hear it a mile off. And so we are a multicultural nation, and when people sledge multicultural Australia, there are a whole lot of Australian citizens who hear it, feel it deeply, and know that it's people talking about them. I love this country. Like, I really do. I love modern Australia. Modern Australia and multicultural Australia are the same thing. And regardless of whether it's the coalition or anywhere in the debate, when as a nation, if we end up in a debate where you've got Australians belittling each other at scale, that's a bad place for the country to be. And it's the job of parties of government to stand up for modern Australia.
And what do you think about Barnaby Joyce potentially becoming a One Nation leader? Do you think the party would still be as heavily focused on migration under Barnaby Joyce than it has been under Pauline Hanson?
Oh, look, I don't know, I don't speculate, and I can tell you of all my conversations in Queenstown, no one's raised Barnaby with me.
Let's move on. I want to ask you about boat turnbacks. Is it the case that people smugglers are now using smaller boats to try to reach Australia, and how is Border Force responding to that?
No, thanks. It is the case that the big vessels that you used to see years ago isn't how the operation is being attempted these days. It's smaller, faster boats that they're trying. The thing in common with our response is none of these attempts are successful. Zero. But the attempts that are being made mean that we've had to change some of our methods as well. Probably the most significant change in response these days is the majority of people now get sent straight back to their country of origin. So you used to really only see people going back to Indonesia or off to Nauru for processing, but the majority of cases now are going straight back to country of origin. We had one very recently where within 72 hours we had everybody back to their country of origin. There was one in May, for example, where it was a mixed boatload of people from different countries, and we had to, from 3 different sorts of citizenships that people had come from. It was more complex, but we still made sure we returned people directly straight back to the countries of origin.
Can you tell us which countries we're talking about here?
No, I can't. I can't, I'm afraid. But this is happening now. It's happening fast. But I'm glad you've asked me the question, because it's important. Because obviously it's always in the political interests of my opponents to try to argue that somehow attempt equals success. They can attempt, and they're attempting in different ways, but the success rate remains at zero. And Operation Sovereign Borders continues to evolve. As the threat changes, the response changes.
Can I ask you about those coming from Gaza? You've said about 600 or 700 Palestinians have been approved for visas to come to Australia. Does the ceasefire, though, in Gaza change anything? Do they still need safe harbour in Australia?
Yeah, look, if I can say that's the number of people on our books. I have to say we're not sure if they're all alive. So, you know, some people in that number will choose to stay. Some people may end up with other options that they'd prefer to take, and there will be some people who we don't hear from again. And there's some on that case list that we haven't heard from for a very long time. A significant number of them are part of split family groups, where some of the family is in fact here in Australia, and they're wanting to join. You need to remember our humanitarian program that we run around the world isn't limited to places where there's an active war. There is decency that Australia shows to people from around the world. We've been, you know, there are Israelis within who've been approved for humanitarian visas as well. I've got no intention of cancelling those either. We're a decent country. We are talking about people where all the checks have been made, and some of them won't choose to come here. Some of them won't be alive
But for those
anymore.
who do still want to come, who've been granted a visa, are they on humanitarian visas, and are they permanent? Like, are they allowed to stay in Australia permanently?
When people are offshore, the first visa in cases like that's issued is a temporary visa. Yeah, there's a whole lot of security checks that are made, probably more than for any other cohort I can think of.
Is that a temporary protection visa? I thought Labor opposed temporary protection visas.
No, temporary humanitarian visas we've never opposed.
Okay, so they come on a temporary humanitarian visa, and then you decide whether they can stay permanently.
That's right. That's right. You make decisions, and some people make decisions based on what other family are doing, based on opportunity. You need to remember, for a whole lot of the people who come on our humanitarian program, their first priority always was to be safe in the country of origin. And sometimes those dreams get taken from people.
I want to ask you about the so-called NZYQ cohort as well. These are the former immigration detainees. The High Court says you can't keep in detention indefinitely. You signed a deal earlier this year to transfer them to Nauru. How many have been issued visas to go to Nauru?
So there's been some... We haven't made formal announcements, but there's been some reporting of visas in the high teens to 20s and beyond. The reporting that's been out there is roughly correct. There's a few different stages. You've got the stage of the issuing of a visa. You've then got a different stage where people are then taken into detention. You've then got the awaiting of the actual flight to Nauru. And I'm not going to... The numbers change very regularly, so I'm not going to sort of give constant updates on each of those different stages. But if I put it in these terms, what we've legislated for is working. Some people will delay things for a period of time while they pursue legal options within the courts. We always knew that was the case. Importantly, as visas are issued, people are then taken out of the community and put into detention awaiting deportation. That matters. The other thing that matters is cancelling a visa has to have meaning. And until we landed this agreement with Nauru, and I'm very grateful to the government of Nauru for coming forward and offering to help Australia in this way, until that was there, we had a situation where for some people, no matter what laws they'd broken, cancelling a visa was meaningless. And as a sovereign country, we've got every right to say, you know, getting to stay here, having a visa, is part of that.
And how does the deal work for them? Can they work in Nauru? And what happens if they need medical care they can't get in Nauru, if they need cancer treatment or something like that? Can they come back to Australia?
Yeah. So people will have work rights there on these visas. They're 30-year visas. They give people work rights. Right. I've gone and inspected personally the accommodation and inspected the health facilities there. The standard there is good and way beyond what some of the speculation about the health standards has been.
So they can't come back to Australia for health treatment?
No. Well, they don't have a visa. They already don't have a right to be in Australia. It's just because of our international responsibilities, we've had a view that we don't send them back to a place where we think there's a chance of them being persecuted. But that doesn't mean that Australia is the only country they can be in, and Nauru's been willing to help us with this.
On another part of your portfolio, dealing with the booming black market trade in tobacco, the criminal gangs' involvement in this, we see it almost every night on the TV. Was the scale of this problem expected by the government as it started to increase the tobacco excise?
Yeah, look, the concept of illegal tobacco has sort of always been with us and is in every country of the world pretty much. It's a really common thing for criminal groups to be involved with.
It's ballooned though here over the last few years.
But no, that's right. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, which is my next point. So as that increase has happened, it's also meant we've had to look at how the impact here is on organised crime. And I think when people started looking at this debate, they were looking at it in terms of loss of government revenue. When I meet with the police ministers now, we are all looking at this in terms of a challenge for us in dealing with organised crime. Because when you're talking about organised crime, and this is this whole convergence issue I've been talking about, there is a convergence of threats now. And so the same criminal groups are involved in organised tobacco. You'll have some of them involved in forms of arson. You'll have some of them involved in the drug trade. They'll be involved in child exploitation. All of these things start to interlink. So everything we can do to attack those networks helps with the full range of issues. A bit later today, I'll be announcing, but I guess I'm now announcing it now on your show, the National Disruption Group. It'll be headed by Australian Border Force, but we are bringing together all the state and territory police forces, the Australian Federal Police, AUSTRAC, the Criminal Intelligence Commission, the Department of Home Affairs, the Department of Health, the Illicit Tobacco and Vape Commissioner. We're bringing all of that together in a single disruption group. Because to do this, it's not only the interception and the good work that Border Force do, intercepting containers at the border and intercepting illegal tobacco at the airport. We also need to look at what happens before it reaches the border, what happens post-border, what happens at the warehouse level, and what happens in terms of the flow of funds for these organisations as well. So that National Disruption Group involves, if there's a cohesion of threats and a convergence of threats, there needs to be a convergence of protection in responding, and that's what we're announcing today.
I mean, at the start of last year, the government announced a major Border Force crackdown and said that there'd be a coordinated multi-agency, multi-jurisdictional response from federal, state and territory governments. How is this thing you're announcing today different?
Oh, it's not simply one group within each government and representatives of each government. We now have in the one disruption group. We effectively have every relevant agency coming together to look at how this works the whole way along the pathway. Before the last police ministers meeting, I had some wariness as to what level of cooperation we might get and to what extent the states might just say, oh no, this is a Commonwealth problem. Because of the way organised crime have moved in here, because of some of the impact, I've had small businesses take me through some of the challenges that they've faced as a result of this. This is something where we need that higher level of coordination to have the formal group with every agency looking at every stage of this supply chain.
Two quick ones. Tony Burke, the PM, about to meet with Donald Trump at the White House. Do you think this will be a positive meeting or are you a bit nervous?
Oh, look, the relationship that we've been having, both the Prime Minister already with the President and certainly for myself with Home Affairs, working with the Secretary for Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, working with the Director of the FBI, Kash Patel. The engagement government to government has been really strong. Really strong. And so for me, that's very specifically on the measures to keep people safe. But that sort of engagement I think we've been seeing across government, and that sort of marks the foundation for the meeting. But as you know full well, it's not the first time they've spoken, it's not the first time they've communicated, and looking forward to the meeting.
And I should finally ask you about the big political and policy issue during the week for the government. That was the Prime Minister telling the Treasurer to find a better way to do the superannuation tax, and the Treasurer was left to announce that the other day. Has this damaged Jim Chalmers at all, do you think?
No, not for a minute. What we've done, as Jim has said himself, is we've listened to the different responses that have been there, and we've found an outcome not only that makes sure that we're dealing with people who have been using superannuation for purposes that really doesn't have anything to do with retirement income, but also a very serious benefit for low-income workers. And you know, one of the limitations of the superannuation scheme can be what happens to people on lower incomes, and that part of the announcement that Jim made during the week, it probably hasn't received as much publicity as we'd all hope. That will be life-changing for people in retirement.
But in terms of the internal dynamic, is this a sign of a Prime Minister who's more cautious on reform and a Treasurer who's more ambitious?
Well, we've ended up with a situation where, as the Treasurer said himself, Jim made clear, we've ended up with something where there are really good benefits for low-income workers, as well as making sure that the policy objective he was always seeking, which is to make sure that superannuation is there for retirement income, that's being backed in with the system we put in place.
Tony Burke, thanks for your time this morning.
Great to be back. See ya.
Coming up, we will get to that superannuation back down announced during the week. First, let's get back to our panel. Laura Tingle, Peter Hartcher and Karen Middleton. Karen, Barnaby Joyce, obviously Tony Burke not wanting to weigh too heavily into the latest turmoil within the coalition, but this is the latest instalment of chaos that we're seeing on their side. What is Barnaby Joyce up to? Well,
it's an excellent question. I mean, there are a lot of possible permutations to this. He has certainly been re-enlivened in politics since the election in relation to the net zero question on the coalition side. He's been agitating a lot more. He's indicated in a statement that he won't recontest his seat of New England in the House of Representatives for the Nationals at the next election. The question is, what does that actually mean? Now, if he just retires and goes, everyone says, bye-bye, thanks for your service, that's it. If he recontests, even in the Senate, and including for another party, as I understand it, if he loses, he gets 3 months' pay. So there's a financial incentive. If he wins and he's with One Nation, then perhaps he does become a future successor to Pauline Hanson. But also don't forget, the One Nation won a seat in New South Wales at the last election. Warwick Stacey, who won that seat, resigned very quickly for health reasons. Sean Bell has taken that seat. He's from Queensland. It's not out of the question that Barnaby Joyce could somehow end up installed in that seat as well. So, I mean, there's a lot.
New South Wales Senate.
Yeah, the New South Wales Senate seat. So, you know, there's a lot of water to go under the bridge.
I get the feeling, Peter, this might happen well before the next election. What do you think? Is Barnaby Joyce going to jump ship to One Nation?
Well, as I understand it, the position is not confirmed, but highly likely.
Highly likely
is the form of words he's been using with colleagues. He's been feeling humiliated and ostracised by his own party. I mean, they keep coming up with special rules to contain Barnaby. There was you'll remember the Turnbull government, Malcolm Turnbull created the bonking ban specifically to deal with Barnaby. Then in the last election, the National Party created the Barnaby stay home rule that he wasn't allowed to campaign outside his own seat. Since then, most of his party in the parliament, including the leader, have largely ostracised him, and he has not been happy. The expression, the outgrowth of that, you now see. He's decided he's leaving the Nationals. He hasn't yet formally done it, but I think we can fully expect that to happen.
And he says he's keeping his options open, which is
a pretty big clue.
Provocative, yeah.
He had been, as I understand it, canvassing a range of options, including potentially starting a new political party. But he's certainly determined that he's going to leave. He doesn't think the coalition can win the next election. He's not the only person with that view. As he said to colleagues, what's the point of me spending the rest of this term and the next term, 5 years, sitting in the corner, being ignored and humiliated. So this is the outgrowth of this is here's this opportunity now. He's 13 years younger than Pauline Hanson. He wants to stand. He wants to be relevant again. He wants to line himself up for the leadership of One Nation. And he sees himself as reforming the entire political spectrum by shifting it to the right. And his main mission is the destruction of renewable energy and net zero.
This has become just a central focus for Barnaby Joyce, I would say, around the time of the election. Certainly since then, he's just full focus on this net zero thing.
Well, he doesn't mind if he destroys David Littleproud's leadership either, I don't think.
I don't think there's been a lot of love lost there for a while. But look, here's someone who would certainly like him to come across to One Nation.
I think he's more aligned with One Nation's policies than what he is with the National Party. He's at loggerheads with David Littleproud, who's more of a moderate and progressive.
So, Laura, just to Peter's point about what's going on the right of politics in Australia right now, and globally as well as we've seen in the US, the UK and so on. You've got Andrew Hastie going to the backbench, Jacinda and Jibber Price as well. You've got movement all over the place, this musical chairs. Barnaby Joyce was seen to be sort of at the tail end of his parliamentary career, but if he were to jump to One Nation and become leader, what does this mean?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, presumably it means he'd be running for the Senate, and in some ways this would be full circle. I mean, one of Barnaby Joyce's most successful political policy periods was when he was the swinging vote, when he first came into the Senate. We all remember
Vote
or forget
39,
rah politics, regional and rural affairs, and he had this powerful swing factor on Telstra and communications in the bush. So he would, he's got that in his head. So that's one thing. The second thing that does leave me wondering, though, is One Nation is basically Pauline Hanson's vehicle, baby, whatever. It's a pretty chaotic structure. Yeah. And I'm just thinking, does Barnaby Joyce, whatever his retail appeal, which everybody always talks about, has he got the energy, if I can put it that politely, to actually run a political party and make it function like One Nation? So that's one thing. But the other question then becomes, of course, particularly in the context of James Paterson's speech, the Shadow Finance Minister's speech, sort of basically telling everybody to pull their heads in this week, if he becomes a more credible sort of right alternative as the leader of One Nation, which is focused very much on energy, not so much on the migration issues that Pauline Hanson's focused on, does that actually give the coalition a bit more room to go back to some sort of more moderate middle?
It's still not an easy one for the Nats. And look, people have said, Mark Latham, Karen, he joined One Nation, that ended terribly. Big difference though, he was a former Labor leader, not exactly trying to drag Labor Party voters and branch members over to One Nation. The National Party is much, much closer to One Nation. It's their branch members and voters who have been drifting to One Nation.
Well, there's a conservative section of the Nationals that would have a lot in common with One Nation on matters like immigration, on energy and a number of things like that. So in that respect, yes. But I think the analogy people are trying to draw is that people thought it was a good idea at the time, the Mark Latham thing. It proved to be a very bad idea. He was ill-suited to that job and they felt they were vindicated, those who were saying behind the hand, no, we shouldn't have this leader. So, in that respect, that's what they're telegraphing, I think.
And what does this mean for the coalition then, Peter, for David Littleproud and for Susan Lee? It's just more headaches.
Well, if I'm a Nationals member of Parliament, I'm now worried that Barnaby Joyce will come into my electorate and campaign for One Nation against me and take votes and maybe take my seat. So that's a big new pressure. Barnaby's a publicity magnet, as we all know. He's a force of nature. He may not be terribly organised enough to run a party, but he's certainly got the energy and the fire in the belly to make a big impact. How the Nationals deal with that will be interesting to see. My understanding is that more than one of them have contacted him since my colleague Paul Sakal at the Sydney Morning Herald broke this story on Friday, and to express disappointment, outrage, and all the rest. My understanding is that he's been singularly unmoved and wondered why they hadn't been talking to him in recent months.
Astonishing.
But suddenly they're terribly interested because they're under pressure. Now, what that means for the Liberal Party is an entirely different question.
Well, there's not much I can do about it.
But the interesting thing for the Liberals in the last couple of days is we've seen Angus Taylor suddenly re-emerge in this interview with The Australian, in which he didn't really say a lot more than James Paterson had said in his speech, which is, you know, we have these twin traditions, we need to maintain them, the sort of traditional liberalism and conservatism. So it was a bit like, look at me, woohoo, I'm here, don't forget me, because we've been talking about Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price and Andrew Hastie and now Barnaby Joyce, and Angus Taylor he thought he was the obvious conservative alternative to Susan Lee, so he was sort of putting a stake in the ground.
But
somehow.
like James Paterson, he's trying to hold the show together.
Yeah.
On superannuation, let's talk about the government and what was one of the biggest policy shifts I think we've seen under this government. What went on here, Karen? You've written a lengthy piece about this for The Monthly and the dynamic between Albanese and Chalmers and what we've seen through the course of this issue.
Well, remember when this was announced in 2023, Albanese and Chalmers announced it together. In fact, it was Anthony Albanese that made the announcement with Chalmers alongside him. So he was endorsing this change initially. Something changed. It didn't get through the parliament in the last parliament. It's been sitting there sort of off to the side. It then disappeared after the election.
What changed? Because clearly the Prime Minister then came to the view, we've got to get rid of this taxing unrealised gains.
So either he didn't understand the impact or didn't think about the impact of the unrealised gains and non-indexation initially, or people got in his ear and said, this is problematic, it's going to be a problem.
People like Paul Keating?
Well, Paul Keating we know did. The coalition inexplicably did not campaign against it at the election. Labor thinks they're very lucky about that because similarly, you know, with franking credits in 2019, the coalition ran a very effective campaign against that. So they got off lightly with that, and maybe it's the simple thing of, well, look, you know, after that he's decided it's a risk he doesn't want to take. He's clearly, Anthony Albanese made it clear to Jim Chalmers he had to change it. There was leftover unfinished business with the low-income super tax offset that you spoke about. There'd been an anomaly created when they adjusted the tax cuts a year or so ago that meant that those lowest income people were going to be paying more tax on their super than they were on their income. So they needed to fix that anyway. So he's packaged it up.
It might be a better outcome.
He's packaged it all up. He's found a different way, Jim Chalmers, to do it. He's put an extra layer of burden on the highest income, almost like if you complained about this and you've got 10 million in your super, well, I'm going to whack you even harder. But it's a humiliation for him. It is. He was overruled, and I don't think he wanted to do it.
Look, there was debate between them about getting rid of this unrealised gains, but at the end of the day, the PM is the PM, and his authority is much enhanced after the election, and Chalmers accepted that.
Look, well, a few things. You know, you say what's changed. Well, 2 years of, you know, it not going anywhere, and it was bad policy. You know, unrealised gains was bad policy. Is the outcome that they've come up with bad policy? No. You know, now the great irony here is Paul Keating clearly, you know, let anybody know who wanted to know, or who didn't want to know, including the Treasurer and the Prime Minister, what he thought of it. And for those of us who, shall we say, have long memories, of course, Paul Keating was spectacularly and publicly overruled at the tax summit on option C by his Prime Minister. So he knows what it feels like. But the bottom line is he survived quite happily. You know, life goes on. Jim Chalmers will go on. You know, would he prefer that not to have happened? Of course not.
I mean, clearly Jim Chalmers too has, you know, leadership ambitions one day, but he has been deferential to Albanese right throughout this government period, and
he subscribes to the position that the Prime Minister should get his way, and that's what happened. Albanese's concerned. You asked Tony Burke, is this the outgrowth of the fact that we have a very cautious Prime Minister, and the answer is yes. Albanese saw this as potentially haunting the government at the next election campaign. Scare campaign based on the lack of indexation, so that if your balance goes over $3 million, you're going to be paying a higher level of tax or getting a lower concession, and that would affect more and more people, and that the coalition could run a scare campaign based on that. A couple of months ago, Albanese called up Chalmers and said, we're going to go ahead with this policy, but we want you to, you've got to start indexing, and you've got to take out the bit that's going to tax unrealised capital gains. How you do it is up to you. but you've got to do it.
And the indexation change,
make the indexation change.
I think he was always prepared.
And Chalmers then came up with the new design. I gather there were some testy exchanges between Albanese and Chalmers in the remaking of this policy, but that ultimately it was the Chalmers and Katie Gallagher policy prevailed. And they got there in the end. So he was humiliated, as you say.
But he also fronted up and took the medicine to
yes, well, that's
this.
right. And as he said to colleagues, I had to eat a turd sandwich.
Yeah.
And, there may be traces of that around his mouth, but in between now and the next election, he's got a lot of time and opportunity for that to be wiped away.
And those who support the Chalmers position think that the fear of a campaign at the next election, 2.5 years from now, is way overrated, and they think they could have managed it, and they wonder what the panic is and what the paranoia is.
Look, I just want to squeeze in quickly what's happening in Gaza, Laura, and Hamas reasserting or trying to reassert its control, executing rivals and so on. Trump's language during the week seemed to be at one point, I'm not too bothered, they're just getting rid of some criminal gangs. A few days later, you got to stop it or we're going to come in and kill you. What's going on? Are we now in a big vacuum in Gaza? Where's this international stabilisation force? Where's that at?
Well, we are in a vacuum, and Gaza and Hamas has come out of its tunnels and is taking retribution with the various groups who are being funded by the Israelis to run things and take on Hamas. So where's the international stabilisation force? It's still basically an idea and the problem with it is that there are a lot of people, a lot of countries who don't want to actually contribute to it for various reasons. The Gulf states don't really want to sort of be in any position where they're coming in and being seen to somehow police things for the Israelis. The Israelis won't let a UN force in. The Europeans are really reluctant to get involved. So, this is a real problem. And of course, the longer it goes on, the harder it's going to be because Hamas will have reinstated itself. And of course, always the issue with Hamas is that it's not just about their arms. It's also about the fact that they do run the hospital system, what's left of it. They do run the educational system, and that's where they're going back in. They're rebuilding their administrative hold on the strip.
They're going nowhere.
They're not going anywhere. They're making clear everybody knows they're not going anywhere. Everybody focuses on Donald Trump and what he's done, but those Gulf states are crucial to this and their role and Turkey's role in pressing Hamas to pull back. But that was at that sort of level of the Hamas leadership outside Gaza.
Yeah.
It's very hard to do anything about Hamas on the ground.
Yeah, I just thought, we've got to move on. But after the euphoria a week ago at the ceasefire, which is terrific, it is worth noting where this is now sort of stalled, it would seem, in terms of the progress on the peace plan. Look, our panel, Karen Middleton, Peter Hartcher, Laura Tingle, back in a moment with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with cartoonist for The Guardian, Fiona Katauskas, and a very warm welcome back.
Thank you, Mike. It's lovely to be here.
Fiona, Paul Keating might have been a fan, but Jim Chalmers' changes to superannuation weren't so super.
No, the reviews were decidedly mixed.
Yeah. Matt Golding has done a lovely job here. I think he's saying that this new government is born to be mild. Can you spare some modest political reforms as Jim is dragging this huge political capital?
Huge, yes. Yeah. Sorry, mate. It is political capital. You've got to use it or lose it.
It's the big problem, isn't it? No one carries change anymore.
No.
Top shelf, this David Pope. I thought, Fiona, David versus Goliath. The artiste here is working on David.
And we've got Albo here saying, I think we'll leave the tinkering there, Jim. Sometimes it's about not freeing the form in stone.
Yep.
Politics is supposed to be the art of the possible, isn't it? And this looks
the art
just
of the
like,
impossible.
yes, this looks like that's the art of, well, I don't know.
Yeah, the David slingshots turned out to be a pea shooter.
Yes, indeed.
Fiona, you've picked up on people negative sneering.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Yeah, well, there was a report early this week from ACOS, so I was referring to that here. With 14% of Australians may really be struggling, but it's the top percent who actually need our help, as we've got living in poverty, please raise job seeker.
And I take the boomer here as holding the sign?
Poor me, hands off my unrealised gains. Yeah. And something about this, I don't know, doesn't really add up.
Doesn't add up at all.
No.
This was one of my favourite cartoons of the week, I think.
David Rowe, so good.
Super omelette. Maybe crack a few less nest eggs next time, Jim. Thanks. You can't make an omelette unless you crack some nest eggs.
But yeah, but it does look like poor, Jim Chalmers here thought he was cooking up a bit of tax reform, but as far as the PM's concerned, it was a recipe for disaster.
Fiona, the first phase of the Gaza peace plan went into operation this week with both prisoners and hostages returning home finally. Thank goodness.
I think Kathy Wilcox has captured this really beautifully. Probably a lot of people were very happy to be able to return home, but yeah, home sure isn't what it used to be.
No, home is where the rubble is.
Yeah.
Matt Golding, this is a brilliant cartoon.
And just the beautiful tension here, that olive branch just dropping, and you don't know if it's going to knock the whole thing down.
Playing the
It'll
Trump
all
card.
be down to him. We've got Matt here, has Trump as the Joker, although he probably thinks he's King of Hearts at the moment.
And I do hope these are movement lines.
You never know, Mike.
Really well drawn from Warren Brown, parting the Red Sea. He's got him as Moses. I just can't help myself. We feel like breaking into song.
Having got the hang of performing miracles, Donald revelled in his time in Egypt. I don't know, you wake up every morning going, oh my God, I can't believe he's done what I thought was impossible. So, he seems to be able to bend the world to his will. This could quite possibly be literal rather than metaphorical.
Yep. Fiona, our great and powerful friends mightn't be as predictable as they used to be. However, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, is hoping his trip to Washington comes up trumps.
It's a really difficult thing for world leaders because you're playing to two different audiences, your domestic audience and Trump. I do not envy the Prime Minister at all.
It's a tightrope, isn't it? And David Rowe has picked up on the zeitgeist perfectly here. The Summer of Cricket Trump Tour 2025. Is all this really necessary, Don? Yeah. Don Farrell, yeah.
Measuring him up. Got to look after the critical minerals, Albo.
Yeah, nothing hurts more than a good swift kick in the critical minerals.
No.
It will be a daunting thing to wander into the Oval Office. Brett Lethbridge has Jody here going, how's the Trump prep going? He's in the cheerleader gear here.
Yeah.
Nowhere else I'd rather be than in the house with DJT.
Taking it one step at a time, says the Prime Minister. Well, I hope that the Prime Minister comes with a nomination for the next year's Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
It's the price of admission these days to see Donald Trump.
Yeah. Finally, Fiona, the Stanleys were awarded last night. That's the Australian Cartoonists Association Awards. And the winners are, drumroll please.
Kathy Wilcox for editorial cartoonist, and for the Gold Stanley, which is the big Stanley, the Stanley of all Stanleys, David Rowe. Huge congratulations to both of those legends.
Yeah, Fiona, it's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week. I'll let you do the honours.
Thanks, Mike, and back to you, David.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Mike. Congratulations, David Rowe, Kathy Wilcox as well. Let's get some final observations. Karen.
A couple of interesting appointments this week. The PM's international advisor, Cathy Klugman, moves in to head up the Office of National Intelligence, but it's the man she's replacing that's had a bit less in focus, I think. Andrew Shearer, who worked for John Howard, served successive coalition governments. The Labor government kept him on and put him in that position. He's been a controversial figure. Not everyone in the government has loved him, but they're appointing him as ambassador to Japan. Now, we have a frigates contract with Japan. We're due to get frigates by, I think, 2029. And there was a big push prior to Donald Trump's elevation for Japan to join AUKUS. So Japan remains very important. And with the quadrilateral dialogue kind of off the boil and tensions between India and the US, it's quite interesting that we're putting an intelligence chief in that job. And it means Anthony Albanese clearly supports him.
Yep. Peter.
I thought this week was a really interesting crossing of a threshold in the international power struggle between the US and China, where Trump has effectively admitted that he has been overpowered by China, because when China announced its export controls on rare earths, effectively an embargo to the US, Trump retaliated with a threat of a 100% tariff on Chinese goods. A few days later, Trump was saying he doesn't think the 100% tariff would be sustainable. He said it's unsustainable. He's admitted that his retaliation is not going to be effective, it's not workable. Therefore, China wins. They're going to sit down at a negotiation probably in Seoul, in South Korea, in 2 weeks. It'll be interesting to see what's extracted. But that was the crossing of a threshold where China took the upper hand.
Yeah, and that meeting could have even more importance for Australia than the one coming up in a couple of days in the White House. Laura.
David, across the ditch, a former Conservative New Zealand Prime Minister Jim Bolger died this week and was lauded by John Howard. Bolger was never sort of particularly spectacularly exciting Prime Minister, but what he did do was he actually took a really big step on reconciliation with Maori people, updated the Treaty of Waitangi so people could get compensation. But the main thing about that was that when he was asked why he did that against a lot of the opposition in his own party, he said because it was the right thing to do. And that's a statement you don't sort of really feel like many Australian politicians would make about anything these days.
It's a fair point. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Finally, with all those musical chairs in the coalition right now, there's even been talk of some Liberals defecting to the Nationals. Jane Hume, however, won't be one of them. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
Well, look, I do look very fetching in a Nakubra, Nat, I'll tell you that much, and I'd have to speak a lot slower and talk about the regions more often down in Cocky's Corner. But look, no, to be honest, I am too fond of good coffee and free markets to join the National Party.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.